A family are found slaughtered in their own home, and no one could have predicted who was responsible for these cold-blooded killings. You're watching Totally True Crime. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe. Then you'll be notified every time a new video drops. Today's case takes us to Adelaide in southern Australia. 16-year-old Chantel Rowe lived in a town called Kapunda. It's small, with under 4,000 people living there in the present day, and there was even less in 2010. It's known to be a bit of a tourist hotspot due to the nearby vineyards in the wine region of Barossa Valley. Chantel Rowe was 16 years old in 2010, and she lived with her parents, Andrew and Rose. She also had an older brother called Christopher, who lived close by with his girlfriend. The family had moved there from Adelaide, where the pace of life was much faster than Kapunda. Chantel's father, Andrew Rowe, owned a carpet cleaning business, and he and the rest of the family were well-liked members of their community. Chantel was outgoing, she had many friends, she played netball, she attended school, and like most 16-year-olds, she was excited about getting a job to start earning her own money. In October 2010, she got a job as a waitress at an eatery called Café Divine. It was around 15 to 20 minutes away by car from her home, but as Chantel didn't drive, as she wasn't old enough, she would sometimes stay with friends who lived close by to help with the logistics of getting to work. Chantel also had a boyfriend. His name was Dylan Pratt. He knew a lot of her friends, and she knew most of his. So when her parents told her that they would be going away for a night together, she used that as an opportunity to have some of her friends and Dylan's friends over at her house for a gathering. Some of them stayed overnight, and the next day when her parents returned, she told them that she wasn't feeling well. She had flu-like symptoms, and she decided to tell her work that she wasn't going to be in the next day. With that, she went to bed. The next day, the police received a phone call from someone who knew the Rowe family, saying they'd gone to their home and stumbled across a potential crime scene. They wanted the police to attend urgently, so an officer was sent to the home in the small town. There were only 2 officers that covered that area, so other resources were brought in from other nearby forces. Once they entered the property, they could see something was very, very wrong. Chantel Rowe was found dead. She'd been stabbed multiple times. As the police officers went through the rest of the house, they found 2 more bodies. They were soon identified as Andrew and Rose Rowe, Chantel's parents, and they too had been stabbed multiple times. It didn't take long before the local news crews to start arriving at the scene.
Mystery surrounds the deaths of 3 people found in their Kapunda home in the state's mid-north this morning. Police have confirmed a 16-year-old girl and her parents have died, but they're not saying how it happened. Detectives will cordon off the street for several days as the investigation continues. A visitor to the family's Harriet Street home alerted police after the traumatic discovery just after 11 o'clock this morning.
3 bodies were found in the house earlier today, and we believe they're all from the same family.
Teenagers gathered near the house after recognising the address on Facebook.
Well, if it is a house, we made shanty, put shanties with it, and I don't know if it's a house, because I know an older brother than that, so.
Police won't reveal how the 3 died, but plan to cordon off the street for most of the week while they investigate.
News in a small town travels fast, and soon people were lining the street outside of the Rowe family home, trying to get a look in to see what had happened. People started to put on Facebook that a family had been killed on Harriet Street in Kapunda, and Chantel's brother Christopher was desperately trying to get hold of his sister, mother or father after seeing the post. He couldn't reach any of them. Their phones kept ringing out. So he put a post on Facebook asking if anyone knew which family had been killed. He was on holiday and worried sick. One of his friends replied, saying it wasn't his family. But his friend had been wrong, and shortly afterwards, the police called Christopher and told him that his mother, his father, and his sister were dead. At first, the police wondered if this had been a murder-suicide, but they soon ruled that out due to the positions of the bodies and the injuries they had. None of them were self-inflicted. A neighbour said that she heard a scream around 1 a.m, but hadn't thought much of it. The locals were devastated. They all knew and loved the Rowe family. Who would want to murder them in such a brutal way? The police started an investigation, and the bodies were sent to the coroner. Andrew Rowe had been stabbed 29 times. Pieces of the knife had broken off inside his body. Rose had been stabbed 50 times. Chantel was stabbed 33. And as if that wasn't horrific enough, she'd also been raped. The police were able to get a DNA profile of the murderer. They ran it through their police system, but there were no matches. Kapunda had never ever had a murder in their town, and now they were dealing with a mass killer. One other avenue the police considered was that this could have been the work of a biker gang. Andrew had a motorbike, but it wasn't a Harley Davidson, and there was no evidence that he was part of a gang, so that was quickly ruled out. But when the police got their first lead, they saw that it was from a local man who had logged onto his Facebook and written a post that said this, quote, "I have done something terrible. I don't know if I'm able to live with myself." A friend of this man had seen his post and called Crime Stoppers, but that man had an alibi, and it turned out that the post had been something to do with a situation within his own family. The police did take a brief look at Christopher Rowe, but he'd been on holiday in Queensland, and he was utterly devastated at the loss of his family. It was clear that he had nothing to do with it. The next person the investigators looked at was Dylan Pratt, Chantel's boyfriend. But he adored Chantel and got on well with her family. There was no evidence linking him to their murders either. The rumour mill was in overdrive, as someone started a rumour that Chantel had been pregnant. Some of the local newspapers, including the Daily Mail, actually printed that she was pregnant, and in those articles it has not been corrected since, despite the coroner confirming that she was not pregnant when she was killed. The investigators looked into the lives of the Rowe family carefully, but nothing stood out as unusual. They didn't have any known enemies, they weren't involved in criminal activity or drugs, and they didn't owe any dangerous people any money. By all accounts, they were a happy, normal and loving family. So the police were back to square one. Nothing had been taken from the Rowe's house on the night they died. All valuables were still there, and there was no sign of a break-in. The crime scene investigators had taken Chantel's phone and laptop to see if there were any clues, and there were. Two things stood out. There had been an unsuccessful login attempt on Chantel's laptop in the early hours of the morning after they'd been murdered. And on her phone, there was a failed reply to a text message that had been sent to Chantel by her boyfriend Dylan. He had messaged her at 5:30 a.m. to see if her flu-type symptoms had gotten any better. The message didn't send because she'd run out of credit on her phone. With these two factors, plus the fact that she had been raped during the attack, the police suspected that Chantel was the intended target, and their next move was to interview any of her male friends that knew her. They were all cooperative, and all of them were asked to give a swab of their DNA to rule themselves out of the investigation. But there was one person who said too much and made the police consider him as a potential suspect. His name was Jason Downie. Jason was an 18-year-old Scottish expat who had moved to Australia with his mother and sibling just 4 years prior. What struck the police was how tiny he was. He was also very thin. He had never been in trouble with the police. Could he really have killed 3 people? When he was interviewed, he was calm and cooperative. But it was during this interview with police that he complained that he didn't have a girlfriend and that he had an alibi for the night that the Rowe family were killed. But that turned out to not be true. When they looked into his alibi, it didn't exist. He'd had an argument with his mother, and she'd locked him out of the family home around 11 p.m. So he said he'd ended up sleeping in his car. But the biggest red flag came when the police asked to take his fingerprints, and they saw multiple scratches and wounds on his arms and hands. He told the police officers that he'd got these scratches by falling off of his bike. Jason worked in a car repair shop where he was a trainee mechanic, and he told the police that he'd been so upset when he found out that Chantel and her family had been killed that he'd had to leave work and go home. The police were now extremely suspicious of Jason, and when the DNA profile from the semen on Chantel came back as his, he was instantly arrested. Jason's mother wrote to him whilst he was on remand. She wrote, "Please tell the truth." His own mother thought he was capable of this triple killing, and that spoke volumes. But there was still a huge question. Why would Jason want to kill this family? Could this slender, tiny 18-year-old boy have killed 3 people? The police started to put together the relationship between Jason and Chantel. It turned out that Jason was a friend of Dylan's, Chantel's boyfriend, and Dylan knew that Jason fancied his girlfriend, but he told the police that he found it amusing and he wasn't threatened. He thought it was just a crush, but it soon transpired that it had been much more than that. It was more of an obsession. In the lead up to Chantel's murder, Jason had constantly messaged her on Facebook. He'd been waiting for her as she came out of school and started walking her home. He'd been suggestive, telling her that he liked her, and that he'd been going past her house dozens of times a day in the hope of catching a glimpse of her. He told her he wanted to be with her. Armed with this information, Jason was charged with the murders of the Rowe family, and his trial was set for 2012. It was revealed that in the run-up to the trial, Jason had falsely claimed to officers that he had had consensual sex with Chantel just weeks before she died. He then went on to fabricate a story in a letter to his mum that said he'd gone to Chantel's house to see her and stumbled upon a crime scene. He said he'd cradled her as she lay dying. He wrote, quote, "I saw Chantel's feet under the bed. She was alive. I put her in her bed. She had cuts everywhere. She said to me, 'Help,' and she died in my arms. I fucked up, Mum." He then told the police that he'd actually seen a man that he believed was the killer. He said he'd been wearing dark clothing and carrying a green bag. But this was a lie. Because just before the trial was about to start, Jason Downie did the one decent thing that he'd done in this whole awful case, and he pled guilty to the murders of Chantel, Andrew and Rose Rowe. This shocked everyone, as up until that point, he had looked as though he was going to plead not guilty, and the prosecution had been preparing for a lengthy and complex trial. Jason refused to say what happened that night, but the investigators pieced together a strong version of events, supported by the evidence they found. On the night of the murders, Jason Downie had an argument with his mother. In his angry state, he made his way to Chantel's house. He circled their home, and then he found the bathroom window open. He climbed inside, and after a while, he went into Chantel's bedroom. The police suspect he'd gone there wanting to have sex with her, and when she spurned his advances, he started stabbing her with a knife. He'd got the knife from the Rowe family kitchen. Only Jason knows if he held the knife to her whilst he was raping her. But her parents heard the commotion, and he turned his attentions to them. There are many questions that surround this next point, but somehow Jason was able to kill both Andrew and Rose, despite both of them being significantly bigger than him. But it's presumed that the adrenaline and rage that he had been consumed by turned him into a monster, and he was able to overpower them both. It was almost certain that Chantel would have been conscious during her parents' murders. He put her on her bed. He undressed her and assaulted her. It's unclear if she was alive, unconscious, or whether she'd already passed away at this point. He then stabbed her again, and then he redressed her in new clothes that weren't blood-stained. It was then that he attempted to log into her computer. He also attempted to clean up the crime scene. He'd mopped the floors half-heartedly around the bodies, and at some point, as Andrew and Rose lay dead on the floor, he stabbed them both some more, just for the sake of it. Jason was a true monster. He stayed at the house for a few more hours with the 3 bodies around him, and then he left the home in the morning. A short time later, he clocked into his job at the car repair shop and started work. A jury was called in to determine the sentence that Jason should receive after considering all the evidence, and he was sentenced to a minimum of 35 years in prison before he would be considered for parole. Jason was 20 when he was sentenced, so he could potentially be out when he's 55 years old. The press released copies of his handwritten apology to the family and friends of the Rowe family, and it reads, quote, "To all the friends and family of Chantel, Andrew and Rosemary Rowe, first of all, I would like to apologise for my recent actions on November the 8th, 2010. From the bottom of my heart, I'm deeply sorry for my actions. I've hurt a lot of people for what I've done. I know no matter what sentence I might get, it will never be enough. I've caused so much pain, not only in my family, but for many others. I know this apology may not mean a lot to people. I feel that I have to say sorry, as this whole situation has eaten me alive. I had a career, a car, friends, and most importantly, I had my family. Now, due to my recent actions, I have nothing. As much as I hate to say it, I deserve anything and everything that's going to happen to me. I take full responsibility for my actions. I would also like to apologise to the son and brother of the victims, Christopher. I can't imagine what he would be feeling, as he lost the most important people in his life. I want you to know that if I could turn back time, my wrongdoings, I would in an instant, but unfortunately I can't. So once again, I sincerely apologise for my actions from the bottom of my heart. I'm truly sorry. J. Downie. 600 people turned up to the Rowe family funeral. they were all laid to rest together, and the tributes came pouring in. They will be remembered as a loved, happy and wonderful family, and Jason Downie will be remembered as a cold-blooded killer.